Ever since Demon Souls came out in 2009, I had always been very interested with anything From Software had put out. But I had never really tried them myself, whether it be for the fact that I was eating too much cheese, or I just wasn't good enough at the time, or I just didn't want to give it a shot. The world was always so very interesting to me. The characters and the NPCs in the game always very much looked very intriguing, and the overall lore of the entire basis of 99% of their games, from Demon Souls to Bloodborne to Sekiro, they're all very interesting with their own uniqueness and their own sort of flavor and story to tell you. And I had always wanted to give those stories a try, but never, ever, ever thought that I would even be able to get past the first skeleton guarding the castle. And then I saw Elden Ring, and that was definitely something that took me by surprise. I was so very excited in a way that I had never been for any other Soulsborne game, and not only the lore, but just the exploration of it, and the combat, and everything. Which leads us to what we're talking about today. I have never, in my entire life, played a Soulsborne game. I have tried them from time to time on different people's consoles or PCs, but I have never sat down and fully given them a good old I didn't go to college try. And that had always bugged me because they had always gotten very good reviews, and I had a ton of friends who had really had a great time playing them. And so the thought of me playing them made me want to axe kick my desk into oblivion, which I very much did not want to do because it was a nice desk. With that, I have now spent a probably collective total time of 40 plus hours, or about 1 week, in Elden Ring. I've been surviving, gathering, crafting, killing, talking to turtles, talking to crabs, killing crabs, eating crabs, and many things of the sort, all for the glorious goal of becoming the Elden Lord. And while open world games are something that I haven't really been a big fan of in the past, but I have played a very large amount of them, Elden Ring was sort of a bit confusing for me because I was very interested in the lore and everything about that, and the story, and the fact that they were able to get George R.R. Martin 2 seconds while he was on the toilet not making any more of his books to feed some more lore going into this game. All of that combined for something that I was very, very interested in, very excited to give a try. But it was, as I said, an open world survival game. Not necessarily survival in the sense of something like Rust, but it does have a crafting system, gathering, and such and sort of those varieties of things that are very much like survival games. So I was very much looking at it with hopeful optimism, but a bit cautious optimism as well. And I can very much say that all of that cautiousness was thrown off of the very first cliff I could have seen in the game. It was immediately just an absolute beauty and eyesore in such a good way. I can't think of a better word than eyesore, but just the scale and the stature of it was insane. And in my opinion, Elden Ring takes what made people fall in love with From Software's games, and it added a level of depth, nuance, and freshness, and just, like I said, absolute sheer scale that has never been met on this level, or has ever been even attempted on any other title from any other developer. And on top of all of that, Elden Ring is the first game that I truly believe delivers on the core promise of what an open world game is supposed to be. Now, what does that mean? So I believe that when an open world game is made, the main basis of it is the sort of flagship statement of you can go anywhere, do anything, interact with the world in any way. There's going to be everything new and exciting and interesting, and you're not going to be finding a lot of nothing. And unfortunately, time and time again, there have been a fair amount of open world games that I've played, which maybe could be a reason why I've had sort of a skewed vision on a lot of open world games. But there have been a fair amount of open world games where I have spent many a more time walking or traversing the land through just sheer time without doing anything, without going towards something specific, just to traverse the land. And while that can be beautiful from time to time, I can very easily just throw on an A24 movie and watch the wonderful sunsets and the trees and that. When I'm playing a game, I want to be invested, I want to be instigated towards it, I want to interact with it. I had always felt like that open world games had met that to a certain degree, but they had never really gone further than that. They had just sort of, it's almost like they gave you a taste of what a true open world game was, but no one had ever given you the whole fucking pound cake. And Elden Ring slaps that bitch on your table and says, eat up, son. That game, this game, is something that I never thought would be in existence, and just the absolute massiveness of just everything in the game. And I don't even mean that from just the scale or just the enemies or anything like that or the land. It's just how massively jam-packed this map is. There is not one singular pixel in this game that there is not something to do or there is not something to find out. And with the size of this map, that's a fuck ton of pixels. And whether it be a lesser Erd tree with a ginormous Tangela-looking boss with an axe the size of your horse, a mini dungeon, catacombs, or just another tarnished NPC walking through the lands and wanting to hear your tales and potentially have you help them in their journey. There is so much to be explored just in the small little area you get at the beginning of the game, that the sheer dauntingness of it is very scary but very amazing. And after playing, like I said, after about 40 hours in this game, or after about 1 week in this game, this has definitely, in my opinion, raised and set the bar in terms of not just open world games in general, but the interaction you can have with those open world games. It has set that bar to new fucking heights. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. So when it comes to the world and exploring this tarnished land, you'll be constantly finding yourself on your way to somewhere, doing something, going towards a boss that you think you have to go towards, and then you will be immediately veered off that direction to see what the big statue in the distance is, all while a giant mutated bipedal rat is chasing you down with a ginormous sword, wanting to eat you for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And in situations like these, that you'll find yourself in a lot of the time, way more than you think you should, but in a very good way. It keeps you on your toes, it keeps you interested and invested, and it also leaves with some very perplexing moments where you've just escaped something very terrifying that is trying to eat you whole, and you look around and you have no idea where you are. It is the very much equivalent of going with your parents to the grocery store when you're 4 or 5, going to look at the jelly beans or the candy, and turning around and realizing that your mom is not there anymore and you have no idea where she is. That is the same exact feeling I got, only added about 10 million %. It is just absolutely insane what this world can do to you and how it can make you just feel like it's so lived in and so interactive and amazing. And it's things like this that make the world an absolute wonder and joy to discover, and very little ever feels like you're treading over the same land, even when you are. And what I mean by that is, you will find yourself, obviously, because it's open world and you want to go explore and you have to go back to places, you will find yourself going over the same areas time and time again. And I never really figured that out until about hour 24 or 25. Because every time I had gone to the same area I had been to, I had either run about it a different way, killed enemies a different way, or just overall done things a very different way, or it had been presented to me in a very different way that didn't feel like the same stuff. It didn't feel like I was treading over the same map with the same positional enemies or the same type of structures or anything. Obviously, the structures don't change and they're all the same. But it's just, like I said, it goes back to that level of just sort of just realism that the world has. That's kind of sort of frighteningly real, to the point where you'll see some stuff in the game and you can almost picture what it would look like in real life and have the scale almost exactly identical to what real world scale is. And it's things like that definitely make me very interested and invested into exploring the world even more and checking out all the wonderful landscapes and the very terrifying enemies that plague the landscapes. Now, someone who has never put any hair on their bicycle bells from playing a From Software game, I was very, very frightened that I was going to have a horrible time with this game, in the way that I was going to die, and no amount of enjoying the lore would be able to save me from the eventual and perpetual Groundhog Day-esque cycle of getting up and getting my shit mollywopped. However, what I have come to find is that while all Soulsborne games are very notorious and praised for their difficult yet skillful approach to any enemy as small as a crab or as large as a dragon, there is a large amount of wiggle room for, I guess, overall difficulty without a slider if you put in the effort, put on your big boy pants, put on those big boy Crocs, flip on the speed dial, and get out there and get dying. And that isn't really a big thing in and of itself, I understand. I'm sure many people have figured that out since the very beginning of Soulsborne games. But even after trying, like, Demon Souls and Sekiro, which are the two that I probably tried the most, I was really not able to come to the same conclusion, even though I feel like this mindset applies to all of their games. And I feel like a little bit of that has to do with the fact that not only is there this new world with a pathway that is very open and flexible to you, which we'll get to in just a moment, it's just the way you can go about killing or attacking or evading any of the things that are in the world. You have so many things at your disposal, and it feels like so much more than any other game I had ever played, with the amount of customization, with the amount of being able to pretty much do any sort of build with any sort of weapons, up into having fucking skeleton arms in your hands and using them to slice and dice people. From something like that to something like a holy elven inscription that you can swing around that does holy damage, and you need a fuck ton of faith to use it. It's very, very crazy to me with stuff like that, and it's definitely something that I very much enjoy with this game, and it's given me a lot of room to sort of move around it, because when it comes to games like this with RPG style elements where you have stats and stuff, I've very much been someone, even if there's a respec option, I've been someone that has very much not really chosen to do that, whether it's because I think I'm too far into the game, or I feel like I'm not going to have as good of a time doing something else than I am with something that's really working, or any of those sort of different conclusions that come to my head. But with Elden Ring, it's definitely a very different sort of ball game altogether. I won't get into too much spoiler territory, but there may potentially be a way to change some things in the game down the line with your stats, and it gives you a whole new opportunity to essentially start playing a completely different game with a completely different style of combat. You can go from being a sorcerer only who casts spells at a distance and uses a bow and arrow to a berserker style ginormous sword having bearer who can slice and dice through a horde of enemies in the blink of an eye, all while you're blowing fire and coating your arms in fire and poison and blood and dragons and what have you. But it is definitely a very amazing, crazy thing about this game that I have been very excited to try, and from the little bit that I have messed around with trying different builds and such, there's so much freedom and so much room to try new and exciting things. And when it comes with the freedom of the game, I believe that Elden Ring has essentially perfected the Soulsborne formula in a way that no one ever really predicted. In my mind, it took the idea of placing you in a sprawling and illustrious dungeon, castle, swamp, or cave of any sort, with a ton of very difficult enemies, big and small, and have you work your way through the gauntlet, dying and learning along the way, getting new skills, finding new weapons, finding secret tunnels, doing whatever you can to get that little bit of extra damage on that enemy so you can move forward. And what they have done with Elden Ring is take that idea and essentially come up with an entire country of all amazing legacy dungeons and new ideas from the entire From Software team. And I believe with the added benefit of open worldness in a Soulsborne type game, it's allowed people an opportunity that they haven't had in any other game like this. And in my opinion, that is the overwhelming option and need to explore these games. That is something that I've always very much looked at every game and been very upset about, because in order to explore a game like Demon Souls or Dark Souls or Sekiro, you have to push through the enemies. You gotta really, like, you have to know your shit. You have to kill your shit. You have to get to where you need to go. And you need to make sure nothing is following you, because they will not stop following you until they get you. And it's very tense and amazing and interesting to have that dynamic. But it also very much felt like I was constricted from the few times I played them. It always felt like I was very constricted on the fact that I wanted to do all this exploring, look at the lore, talk to the NPCs, do stuff like that. But I always felt like I was very afraid to, because I didn't know what was going to be around the corner or what new boss I was going to have to get past in order to find out more lore. And with Elden Ring, you are no longer confined to a few dungeons and areas where you know in order to progress there's a specific boss you have to beat, and if you're having trouble, you either get good and beat the boss and submit yourself through the most masochistic pain you will ever get, or pussy out and farm for souls and levels. And either way, you're gonna have someone gatekeeping, complaining, and saying that you're shit and that you're not as good as them. But I definitely feel like the whole base, that in my opinion, was the basis of Soulsborne games. The basis of those games was to push through the game, get through those bosses. If you were having trouble, go back into the previous area, farm some souls, farm some levels, get your shit, go back to the boss, and progress. And that did very well. And that obviously was something that people loved to do. And it was in a way that was skillful and tactful. And it didn't feel like unfair. And it definitely felt like you had a steady amount of progression. And if you persevered and pushed through it, you were going to find the light at the end of the tunnel. And that, I think, is what is amazing and jaw-dropping about Elden Ring, that they don't... I feel like a lot of people haven't really pointed out when talking about this game. I feel like it's a very big point for me, is the fact that that was almost the essential basis of every Soulsborne game. And they took that and just threw it completely on top of its head and made the exploration one of the best things about the game now. And I don't really know how they went about doing that, and I don't know how they had the absolute balls to do that, to take a 10-plus-year-old style of game and sort of make it a passenger seat to the bigger exploration. That's the thing. In this game, the dungeons and such obviously play a very large part still, but they give you so much more room for exploration that it almost feels like all that stuff is sort of still there in very amazing ways and very great ways, but it's almost taken a second seat to the amazing amount of exploration and just finding out about things that you can do with the game. So if you're just arriving at Stormvale and Margit, the cane-limping 100-year-old son of a bitch, is slapping your ass down the merry lane with his cane, you don't just have to keep slamming your face into him over and over and over again and hope one of these times you get a lucky combat pattern or you get a good crit or anything like that. There is so much more interesting and very helpful things you can do to progress in the story, as well as gain more levels and more souls, or runes as they're called in this game, without it being a grind fest of their bones into souls. And that's what I feel like is the biggest thing about it, is with that progression and with the leveling and with essentially making the game have its own difficulty slider without having one. It's opened up so much more accessibility to so many more people, because it doesn't just force you to go about it through one boss in one way. You can go behind the boss and find a small mini dungeon and get enough souls there to level up and find a great weapon there that maybe the boss is weak to, and then you can go back to the boss, and it feels like you have turned the difficulty down a bit. And while the enemy is still coming at you hard and the mechanics are still the exact same difficulty and everything like that, you feel not only have you gained more experience and more sort of just knowing of the boss and the game, but you feel like there's that sort of internal slider with the game, that at any time, with this game being the big exploration that it can be and the big, huge, vast amazingness that it is, you are essentially given an invisible difficulty slider, and you yourself can choose where you want to put that. If you want to be a little bit harder on yourself and not farm for anything and just try to go straight for the bosses, you can do that. If you want to turn the difficulty slider down a bit, go for some extra stuff, maybe get a few extra levels, find a very nice sword or a very nice sorcery staff, you can do that as well. Or if you just want to be completely broken and use the blood arts along with sorcery and calling in friends to help you from the netherworld, you can do that as well. And it's something that I think a From Software game has never really tried to do in terms of making it overall have a quote-unquote difficulty slider, but I think they sort of did that intentionally in all the best ways, and it's something that is very amazing, and it has made me fall in love with the game. It is really just an absolute enjoyable time, and there's very few things, minus the infinite dying and the just overall existential dread you get from dying in that game. But other than that, there is nothing that I have played in recent memory that comes to this game. There's so much substance, lore, life, and just there's a journey for everyone to explore in their own ways. And as someone who has never played a Souls game before and is just now continuing week 2 in living in the Tarnished land, I'm just getting started.